In the past week, I've heard from many of you about your concerns with parts of President Trump's agenda and his general disregard for Congress as a co-equal branch of government. I've even heard from some Republicans who've told me that while they voted for President Trump, they haven't supported some of his moves so far. People are genuinely worried about Elon Musk's access to sensitive information, as well as potential threats to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I know you want to hear directly from elected officials like me about what we're doing to push back. Since entering Congress in 2019, I've worked across the aisle to get things done. I truly believe in finding common ground where possible and standing firm on principle where necessary. And that approach has led to real results. I've passed 34 bipartisan laws. 16 of those were signed by President Trump, and 18 were signed by President Biden. These laws have improved lives in our congressional district and across the country, and I remain committed to working with anyone, regardless of party, to build on that record. But I also took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And part of that duty is ensuring that no president of any party exceeds the limits placed on executive power. Regardless of political affiliation, we should all be concerned when any president tries to strip Congress of its constitutional authority. The founders were clear. Congress, not the president, holds the power of the purse. When President Nixon attempted to withhold funding that Congress had approved, Republicans and Democrats stood together to stop him. They passed the Impoundment Control Act, reaffirming that no president has the authority to ignore Congress when it comes to federal spending. Now we face a similar challenge. President Trump is trying to control federal spending unilaterally, ignoring that precedent. And the consequences are real. Clinical trials are at risk, community health centers are diminishing care, and programs millions of Americans rely on, including in Republican-led states, are being disrupted. Let me be clear, I'm not a defender of bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. Government should work for the people, not the other way around. Reform is good and necessary, but destruction is not. The past few weeks have made one thing clear. This administration no longer considers itself bound by legal or historical norms. They're testing the limits of what they can get away with, and too many of my Republican colleagues are letting it happen. Let's look at a few examples of what the administration is doing. First was the decision by President Trump to pardon those who attacked police officers on January 6th. This wasn't about justice or keeping us safe. It was about rewarding loyalty. Notably, it's been reported that some of those individuals who were pardoned are back in jail, including one who was arrested on child sex charges last week in Texas. President Trump has also placed at least 12 different billionaires in key positions of power, many of whom are making decisions that impact every American and trying to close federal agencies. Government should serve the people, not just the billionaires. The so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, run by Elon Musk, is using inefficiencies as an excuse to dismantle the very programs that help working families, veterans, and small businesses to thrive. I call DOGE the destruction of government by Elon. So what's next in DOGE's crosshairs? The Department of Education. If it's dismantled, low-income schools in our district will lose critical resources, and special education programs and Pell Grants for college students could disappear entirely. The administration has also tried and failed to ban birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment is clear. If you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. This isn't up for debate. Yet Trump is trying to undo this by executive order. He can't. A judge has already blocked it indefinitely. But the fact that he's even attempting this is a warning sign. Next is the firing of government watchdogs. If the administration truly cared about reducing waste, fraud, and abuse, they wouldn't be firing inspectors general, the independent officials responsible for investigating that very waste, fraud, and abuse. The mass firing of IGs is a direct attack on accountability. These watchdogs protect taxpayer money. Removing them paves the way for corruption. Next is the attempt to eliminate USAID. USAID is America's top global development agency. It provides disaster relief, fights famine, and strengthens democracy worldwide. Now Elon Musk is trying to shut it down too. DOGE has taken its website offline with no explanation and even placed employees on administrative leave. It's reckless, and defunding USAID would leave millions without life-saving aid, weaken U.S. influence, and perhaps most importantly, let China and Russia fill the void. You know, particularly important for our district are cuts to grants from the National Institutes of Health. The administration wants to gut funding for life-saving medical research, and if successful, it'll have a catastrophic impact for our local universities and our local economy. UC San Diego and UC Irvine are global leaders in medical research, and they'll stand to lose hundreds of millions in funding if these cuts go through. This will mean slower progress towards cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, ALS, diabetes, and other deadly diseases. Finally, just this past weekend, the administration moved to close the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is the only federal agency tasked with protecting Americans from financial abuse, fraud, and predatory lending. This will cut important consumer protections and will impact our pocketbooks. All this leads to some bigger questions. Where's Congress? And where do we go from here? Congress has a duty to act. We must uphold the Constitution and put checks and balances on executive overreach, just as our founding fathers intended. Unfortunately, too many of my Republican colleagues are looking the other way, afraid to stand up for the separation of powers because they fear political backlash. But our system of government only works if we all do our jobs, regardless of party. I will not be a part of abandoning that responsibility, and I'm fighting back through the government funding process, in committee hearings, and by shining a light on everything that's happening. Let me be very clear. This is not about left versus right or Democrat versus Republican. I've always and will always work across the aisle to get things done for our community. I truly believe in finding common ground where possible. So to my Republican friends, ask yourselves, would you want a future Democratic president to act without checks and balances, to act without guardrails? You know, my grandfather didn't fight in World War II to see our country drift towards unchecked executive power. I'll honor his legacy by standing up for our Constitution, our values, and our democracy. The precedent we set in the months ahead will impact Americans for decades to come. My hope is that we can come out of all of this